A man, a father and a grandfather and an avid bicyclist was out for a ride on the Green River Trail in Tukwila. It was a typical spring day. This man ran into a bollard, one of those thick posts that are used to protect buildings or infrastructure. He was ejected from the bike and was eventually found by a passerby. That man on the bike was left a quadriplegic with no use of his arms or legs. So then what? Was it just a tough break for that man, or was there more to the case? Maybe there was a lot more. In our everyday lives, we might hear about these stories on the evening news. Maybe it's a headline in the local paper, or perhaps just a red line of traffic on our way to work. But to the individuals involved, to their loved ones, and to those fighting on their behalf, each and every one of these stories represents some of the most devastating and challenging times in their lives. We share their stories with you. We examine real-life cases of loss, the legal battles that follow, and we talk about recovery too. What does justice look like? This is the True Claims Podcast. I'm Eric Johnson. This is Chris Davis, the founder of the Davis Law Group, and I know you have strong feelings about this particular case. You told me, Chris, that at first you weren't sure what the chances of winning this case would be. That changed dramatically, though, didn't it?
It did. This is one of the cases that I will always remember. Just because when the family contacted me, they wanted me to go to the hospital where Carl was. And I still remember to this day that visit and seeing Carl on a ventilator, hooked up, immobilized with his family surrounding him, and then talking to his dear wife, Sherry. And it had only been a few days, maybe a week or so at most, following the collision, and they had learned already that he was likely going to be a quadriplegic for life. They didn't know at the time whether he was going to be on need a ventilator to breathe. But a very emotional meeting with the family, and it was a case that I didn't think it had a very low success rate for a couple of reasons. But something really stuck with me as far as, I want to help this family. I want to do whatever I can. Even if it means it's unsuccessful, I'm willing to spend the time and the effort to uncover what happened and why it happened and see if there was anybody that, was negligent.
Was Carl Schwartz able to communicate with you at all at this point?
He was, but he didn't remember the collision. He was on medication. He could talk, but, it had been so soon after the accident. I could tell he was traumatized. I could tell he hadn't probably accepted the reality that he was never going to walk again, right? So most of my contact was with his adult children and his wife, Sherry.
So, of course, a lot of people in a situation like this are going to say, listen, accidents happen. You got on a bicycle. There was this big post there. You ran into the post, were you looking the other way? What made you think then, once you got into it, that you could win this case? What are some of the situations surrounding this case that made you think it was winnable?
Well, let's start off right, and you hit upon it, is the bollard was plainly visible. It was in the middle of the path. There was no obstruction. Whenever I show a picture of the bollard to somebody, they say, why the hell did the guy hit it? Well, he wasn't paying attention. That's what most people immediately go to. He wasn't paying attention, that's why he hit it. Well, I've learned as a lawyer that's not always the case. There's oftentimes more than one cause. So I looked at the case from a different slightly angle. I assumed that he was paying attention, that he was a careful cyclist, and he was. So why did he miss it? Why couldn't he see it? That's kind of the approach that I took to this case. And so we found out that the trail was owned by King County, and we immediately started sending out public records requests to the county for this section of the trail, their trail system in general, the standards, the safety standards and guidelines, if any that they had, who was responsible for monitoring it, maintaining it, who was responsible for marking bollards. We also contacted the federal Department of Highway Traffic and Control to find out, are there national safety standards? And what is the national standard for bollards? we also sent out requests for emails of the Parks Department that was responsible for monitoring or maintaining this area. Thousands of emails, as you can imagine, thousands of records. The records gathering itself took at least a year and a half.
Wow.
And so I spent a lot of time for that first couple of years just getting records, reviewing them, making notes, and slowly but surely I was able to learn why this collision happened.
Let me ask you this. I've seen bollards lots of times. It's usually next to a building so a car doesn't crash into a building or a giant window or something like that. I'm trying to imagine why there would be a bollard in the middle of a trail, a bicycle trail.
Yeah.
Do we know that?
So we know what the county's position on it. They use bollards as points of demarcation of parks. So, but in this case, the bollard placement was very unusual given the physical circumstances of the area. But as Carl was going down the trail, he was about to enter the park, Cecil Moses Park. And the county had put a single metal bollard in the middle of the trail right at the park entrance, which is unusual in and of itself, because most of the time the bollard is placed to mark an intersection or a crossing area where there's traffic, motor vehicle traffic, and pedestrian or cycling traffic. That wasn't the case here. That was one of the questions that I had when I was investigating the case.
So you're taking this case, you're investigating. It takes a long time, more than a year and a half, and then the county's involved, right? You're going after the county. That's who you're going after.
Well, not at that time. I'm sending requests for information under the state's Public Records Act statute, and so I'm trying to find out what's going on. How, are there standards? Is there anything unusual about this area? Why was the bollard placed here? If you placed the bollard here, why weren't there markings? Are there other crashes, not only at this bollard, but anywhere else on the 200-plus mile, King County trail system, et cetera? All of these questions I'm wanting the county to answer and to provide me with records to answer those questions as well.
In the meantime, the Schwartz family is, of course, going through hell, right?
Yeah.
I mean, he's a quadriplegic. Their home is no longer accessible to him. So now that sounds like hundreds of thousands of dollars that the family is going through in trying to deal with this situation. But you found a couple of interesting things about that bollard. People had complained about it, right? People had been worried about the safety of it.
Yeah. So, and that didn't come until a couple of years into the case. So what I discovered is that there are national safety guidelines. Okay, it doesn't mean the county or any local jurisdiction, has to follow those guidelines. The county also had certain guidelines that they were considering using for bollards in general, but which they had not yet formally adopted. One of those guidelines that they were considering was diamond marking all bollards, putting a diamond, a yellow marking around the bollard, diamond shape with lines going out in either direction. Because oftentimes when you're a cyclist, you're looking down at the road, you're looking up, but you're looking down, right? So the pavement markings become huge as far as alerting cyclists of potential dangers on the trail.
And there were no markings on this bollard.
There were no markings.
It's just there in the middle of the trail.
It's in the middle of the trail. It was also painted white. It had a single red reflector on it. The white color and the reflector did not comply with the county's own draft safety guidelines, and it also did not comply with the national safety guidelines that had been implemented.
So the case was originally dismissed. Is that correct? Initially dismissed, and then you appealed.
So another interesting aspect of the case is that the county asserted what is called the recreational use immunity statute, which basically says that if you own property and you hold it out for the public to use recreationally, if there's an accident on your land, you are immune from being sued. You are protected. There's an exception. if the injury is caused by a artificial known latent condition, then you can sue the landowner. So the county took the position that the bollard was a latent condition, meaning that's defined under Washington law at the time. If you can stand next to it and see it, it's not latent. It's visible. And therefore, the county is immune from any lawsuit concerning that bollard. So that was the major hurdle that I was up against, and which I knew about. I knew about the statute when I accepted the case. That's why, primarily, I felt that the chances of succeeding in the case were very low, is because of that broad statute.
And at first, the case did not succeed, right?
And that's the very reason why. So I filed a lawsuit, and the county promptly filed a motion to dismiss it, and they cited that law. And I thought I had some good facts on my side, and there were a couple of cases that supported my position, but the trial judge dismissed it. And what I knew at the time, though, that there had just been a case involving this issue, involving another part of a trail down in Pierce County that had gone up on appeal, and the appellate court found in favor of the cyclists in that case. So that emboldened me. But even with that case and with that appellate court decision, the trial judge still decided to dismiss the case. We knew that the other case in Pierce County was up on appeal before the state Supreme Court. We just didn't get the decision back.
So now it heads to the Supreme Court. And when did you find the markings that someone had made to show that riders should be careful with this thing?
Yeah, so before the case was dismissed by the trial court, and after I'd already done probably a year or more of investigation and looking, I decided to get on Google and start looking at the area on Google Earth. And if you're familiar with Google Earth, you can go back in time. They've got satellite images that'll take you back in time of the area in question, and you can see changes, right? So I decide to go use Google Earth, and I go back about 15, 16, 17 years. And one of the several of the images appeared to show kind of faint markings on the pavement around this bollard. I'm like, what is that? So I scroll in closer, I zoom in closer, and sure enough, somebody had spray painted in what once was bright orange paint, the word in all caps, post, on both sides of the post of the bollard.
Interesting.
And then with squiggly lines from that word post going all the way back on the pavement, about 10 to 15 feet on either side. And the markings were about, had already been about 80% removed. These were faint markings, right? So I looked at those markings and I'm like, oh my God, somebody probably hit this bollard or almost hit it.
Right.
And took the time and the effort to get paint, come back, and spray paint warnings around it. I knew that the county had a maintenance schedule for this area, especially because it was inside of a park. So I knew that there were daily, crews that would go to the park. Sure enough, there were, but there was no mention of these warnings on the pavement in any of the county's maintenance records. So I do more investigation, and I find the names of former county employees that were assigned to this area. And I contacted, I was only able to reach one of them, a female. And I talked to her about these warnings, and she told me, yeah, she remembered those warnings. That was the only time out of the 200 mile of trails that somebody had ever taken the time to spray paint warnings on the pavement around a bollard. And she had talked with her supervisor and other crew workers. Yeah, they knew the bollard was dangerous, or else why would somebody come out and spray paint the markings? Well, this was all information that the county flat out denied. They denied that they ever had any concerns with this bollard.
Well, you had pictures to show.
I had pictures. And now I had a former employee where I could show that the county was lying through their teeth.
So for years, theoretically, people have been riding past this thing saying to themselves, that's dangerous, or somebody actually hit it or almost hit it. Any other evidence that people were concerned?
Yeah, I found an old blog entry of a cycling group where somebody had posted photos of this bollard, but the cyclist had hit it at night. So I thought it wasn't very helpful to my case because my case happened in bright daylight, right? And then there were some arguable comments on various cycling blogs that kind of referred to the area in general, but nothing that was concrete or specific that could really help me.
One of the things I've learned from you is that it's rare for cases to actually go to trial. And so for this to go to trial and then an appeal, it goes to the Supreme Court. The county must have felt very secure and confident about this case. They didn't settle. They said, go for it.
Yeah, they didn't offer a penny. Their claims people, their lawyers were, in my view, cocky and almost arrogant as far as their belief that the recreational use immunity statute protected them 100%. And if you feel differently, then, if you want to throw the dice and spend, your money going after us, go ahead. We'll see what happens. That was kind of the attitude I faced.
Yeah. So the Supreme Court says, no, this case can go forward. And then, and only then, there was a settlement, and it was a big one, wasn't it?
Yeah. It was then, after we got that Supreme Court ruling, the county finally agreed to mediation, and then we went to mediation, and they offered $10 million to settle the case. I thought the case is worth twice as much. I wanted to say no. I really did, because I felt the county was, had been lying to us. The conduct was egregious in some of the records I found and what they knew and should have known, and the fact that they failed to protect the public. But in the end, it came down to my clients, and my client, Carl, was by this time in his early 70s. We didn't know how much more time he had to live. I wanted to get them some money because one of the reasons that they needed money was to explore alternative or experimental types of care to help him with his quadriplegia and improve his comfort.
So the family, in essence, said, let's settle this thing and get it over with.
Exactly.
You had to feel, even though you thought you could have gotten more for that family, you must have felt good. If you go back early, you said you didn't think there was a high chance of succeeding with this case. You plow through, you find evidence, you get it through the Supreme Court, and then you get the settlement. That had to feel good.
Oh, it's probably the single most rewarding case that I've handled in my career. And if you had told me in the beginning that this case was going to take 6 years, dismissal from the trial court, and hundreds of thousands of dollars of my firm's money to investigate, I would have probably declined the case. I might have declined the case. I might have. I didn't know what I was getting myself into, thankfully, because I really felt for this family. And I knew the county from other cases that they don't play fair a lot of the times. They hide the ball a lot of the times. And so thankfully I listened to the voice in my head that said, take the case, see what you can do. And there was a glimmer in my mind. There was like, I think there's a chance here, right? And that's what really pushed me on in the beginning.
Once it goes to mediation, what is that like? Is it two teams of lawyers in a room across a table debating, talking, throwing out options, ideas, numbers? How does that work?
Not that dramatic,
okay.
Unfortunately.
I've been watching too many movies, haven't I?
This is post-COVID, so nowadays everything is on Zoom, including mediations. And so we did the mediation over Zoom, and so the county's people were in a different Zoom room, and my clients and I were in a different room. And then the mediator would go back and forth and point out arguments and and then exchange numbers and back and forth until finally we had a settlement.
They come up with a number. You go back to the family, ask them if that's acceptable.
Well, the mediator comes in and says this is what they're willing to pay. And so there was a lot of back and forth early on. And when we got the number of $10 million, I declined it on that day. And I wanted to make absolutely sure because I wanted my clients to think about it. And so they thought about it for several days before they came back to me and said they wanted to accept. And so they went back to the mediator and called them and said, we'll accept the $10 million.
And Carl Schwartz,
yeah,
he's still alive?
Yes.
What's his life like?
It's a lot better than before. I mean, he's got his whole home now is outfitted with accessibility equipment. They have a full-time nurse and rehab person that can help him. So he needs 24-hour care. And his wife no longer has to do that. So, I mean, she's one of the bigger recipients of this as well. I mean, like I said earlier, a saint of a woman was caring for him most of the time, and now she finally has help. So they're both doing much better emotionally, definitely.
You wrote a book, Chris. It's called The Wheels of Justice, Washington State Bicycle Accident Law for bike riders so they can understand what their rights are. You've written this whole series of books to help people understand the law, figure out how to go about getting a lawyer, what to be aware of. Talk for me again a little bit about the value that you've seen in writing these books and what people tell you once they use them and read them.
Yeah, so, I wrote my first book, published it back in 2007, and the response was so positive from people because I decided to give the books away for free. And a lot of people will just contact us to get the book and put it in their glove box in case something happens down the road. But the response was so positive that I decided, okay, why don't I start narrowing down books into different types of accidents, because there are nuances and unique factors that apply to every type of case. And so I wanted to do that so that we could educate people if they're in a certain type of accident. And if they want to, for instance, hire an attorney, I've written a book about how to find a good attorney. They don't have to hire me. They can hire somebody else that's just as experienced. But the main goal, the main driver was to educate the public so that, nobody's being taken advantage of by the insurance company, which I see a lot, or used to see a lot before I wrote these books, right? People accepting, pennies on the dollar to settle their claim when it was worth many times more. So yeah, they've proved to be very popular and helpful. And there's a lot of times a client will contact us and they had ordered the book like 10 years earlier. That happens quite frequently. Yeah. So yeah, they've been very successful, and I'm very proud of it.
Well, one thing I've been impressed with when I go through this thing, and your other books as well, when I'll be honest with you, when I first heard about them, I thought, they're just trying to drum up more business, right? But when I go through these books, it doesn't say, please call the Davis Law Group. Here's her phone number. I mean, it really is about the information, and that makes me think that you really did write these for the right reason.
Yeah, well, I'd like to think so. Do we use them in our office is there a marketing angle behind it? Yeah, of course. Did I write it for that reason? No. There are plenty of things I could be doing with my money and time other than writing books that would help me more from a marketing standpoint. But the books were designed primarily to educate people and help them. And so we found that when we represent people, it's always the educated client that does better in their case as well. They get more money for their claim. They do the right things that they should be doing to maximize the chances of success.
Well, they're fascinating. And of course, we all want to wish the best to Carl Schwartz and his family. I hope he lives an even longer life and does well post this traumatic injury that happened on the bike trails. I'm Eric Johnson. This is, of course, Chris Davis. This is the True Claims Podcast. Thank you so much for joining us. Eric Johnson here. I spent the last 30 years reporting on what you need to know, and now I've got something I think everyone could use. The Washington Accident Book Series offers a free legal guidebook on everything from car crashes to dog bites, so that you know what to expect after any kind of accident. Know your rights and how to avoid common mistakes after an accident by getting your free copy at WashingtonAccidentBooks.com.